And let's have a prayer and then we'll start. Father, we thank you for an opportunity to gather as your people to seek your face and seek your grace and mercy. We surely need it, and we thank you for your promises in Christ. We do pray that you would help us understand your gospel and apply it in our lives, and that you would help us in the culture in which we live to make Christ known and to be able to give answers for the hope that is in us. And Lord, give us wisdom how to be bold and gracious at the same time, how not to compromise the truth even when there's a lot of hatred or rejection. We thank you that Christ endured that hatred and rejection to love and to save us. We pray in his name. Amen. Amen. Okay, what we've been doing in here is just some role plays on how as Christians we ought to respond to certain types of believers and unbelievers. And the last unbeliever we've been working on is the intellectual unbeliever. And I said that would be the most challenging, and I think you realize it has been. And I want to review just a little bit from like 3 weeks ago or more. And we went through this deal, like how did we get here as a culture regarding gay marriage? How did we get here like in 50, 60, 70 years? And it has a lot to do with our epistemology, and we went over that. And many have written on this subject, what is a Christian response to postmodernism? What is a Christian response? And I think the fundamental issue is revelation. That is there knowledge outside the box? And by the box I mean our world, our thinking. Is there any transcendent truth or knowledge outside of humankind? And we use the word revelation for that. We've been using that a lot. And as Christians, of course, we believe there's two kinds of revelation, don't we? We believe there's natural revelation. We're made in the image of God. So there is a certain amount of transcendent knowledge from our Creator built in. We have a conscience. We have some sense of good and evil from birth. That is transcendent knowledge. That knowledge is coming from outside the box. But as Christians, we also believe in special revelation. That is, God has sent his Son into the world to reveal himself to us. He is a light that shines in the darkness. And Jesus talked about that a lot. The fundamental issue with our culture today, anybody that's under 50, is this issue of revelation. That is the issue. D.A. Carson's book, he called it The Gagging of God. How many of you have read that book? Anybody? You should read it. It's 600 pages of fine print, but you should still read it. He labeled that book The Gagging of God, and what he means is the suppression of transcendent knowledge from God. That's why he labeled that book that. That's exactly what Western culture has done, is they put a gag in the mouth of God. He doesn't talk to us anymore. We don't hear anything from him anymore. That is the issue. Now, he had a pun in there, in a footnote, where it also makes God vomit. And if you read the book, he's got a pun in there about gagging of God, making God puke. But the issue is revelation. And how do we confront it? There's a negative and a positive approach. And Ryan is going to demonstrate the negative approach today, and he's going to be doulos, and I'm going to be Skep. So we're going to flip roles. And the negative approach, you're going to see it today, that apart from revelation, basically we're doomed. And we can know nothing about good and evil. And then there's a positive approach, which I want to review very quickly because I spent all my time talking about the negative approach a few weeks ago. But here is what has happened in very quick summary form regarding revelation. And it didn't just start in the 60s. It started back in the 17th century with the Enlightenment. And what the Enlightenment did, very simple, we've got special revelation, general revelation. What the Enlightenment did is basically de-emphasize any dependence on special revelation. It's the age of reason. Man has grown out of his superstition. He doesn't need God to talk to him anymore. But Descartes and all the early Enlightenment thinkers, even Kant, they all believed in this idea of innate ideas, that we have a set of innate ideas from a creator. They didn't eliminate this, they eliminated special revelation. Well, when we go to postmodernism, we X out general revelation as well as special revelation. It's just been a progression from the Enlightenment forward. And so this is where we are today. There are no innate ideas, there's no natural law, and not one Supreme Court justice believes in general revelation. Not one. There's 9, maybe one at the most, but even that's a maybe. In other words, we're in a box. There is no transcendent knowledge to humankind other than what we ourselves generate. And so postmodernism basically has X'd both of these out. And it's not even worth trying to find them anymore. That's why nobody studies philosophy anymore. So it's a fruitless pursuit because it isn't there. Enlightenment, they believed it was still there and they could figure it out on their own. So what is the Christian response to this? And I want to go over this really quickly. The positive approach, Ryan's going to illustrate the negative. A positive approach, remember, we're arguing as Christians, not as moralists and traditionalists. Don't get your approach from the conservative talk radio stations. I'm delighted for the movement of conservative talk radio in our culture and as a cultural movement, and I'm refreshed when there is still general revelation in their argumentation. But you need to realize those programs are not giving the gospel or a distinctive Christian epistemology. They are arguing from an early Enlightenment way of thinking that God's our creator, we have 2,000 years or 10,000 years of history about marriage, but so what? If there's no reason as to why that 10,000 years of human history about marriage is correct, so what? If there's nothing from outside of the box, I don't care if your tradition's 100,000 years old. That's all it is. So those are not distinctively Christian arguments. Those are moralistic and traditional arguments, but they're not. We're Christians. So I appreciate the movement. I listen to those guys when I'm driving around, but we're arguing as Christians. How do we argue as Christians? The positive approach is this. You keep the discussion focused on who Jesus is, the one sent by the Father. Focus on revelation, the light shining. It penetrates the box. And begin with the incarnation. If we're going to share the gospel these days, we must begin with the incarnation and assert the most fundamental claim of the gospel. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God in that transcendent realm, outside the box. The Word was with God, and the Word was God, and what? The Word outside the box, what? Became flesh, transcended into the box, descended into the box. That word, interesting title, isn't it? Word. Think that has to do with revelation? You think his title, Word, has to do with the concept of revelation? Of course it does. He can reveal the mind of God to us. That's why his title is the Word. So he descends inside the box, and he dwelt among us. We have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. That's the fundamental claim of the gospel. Jesus claimed that. I'm sent by the Father. So that's the positive approach. Assert the fundamental claim of the gospel. Even before discussing Jesus as man and deity and sacrifice, focus on the fact that he is the one sent by the Father. He is the means of revelation from the Father to mankind. Discuss this claim of Jesus first. And if you read the Gospels again, with this sensitivity, you'll see it all over the Gospels. Jesus talks about him being the revelation of God to man far more than he talks about his sacrifice. I'm not minimizing the importance of his sacrifice, but you read the Gospels and you'll see, I'm sent from the Father sent me. I know the Father is with me. The words I speak are not my own, they're the Father's words. It's all over the Gospels. He emphasized this all the time, especially John picked up on it in the Gospel of John. So assert his claim first, discuss that claim first. And once this is clear, that Jesus is sent from the Father, insist then that we cannot ignore his words. That's the problem today. People claiming to be Christians and ignoring the words of Jesus. We can't ignore his words if he's sent from the Father. Point out what the Father said regarding the Son. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. What does he say? Follow him? No. Obey him? No. Give your money to him? No. What does he say? What's the fundamental thing? The Father is one of few words.
Hear him.
Hear him. This is my beloved Son. What should mankind's response be to him? To listen to him. Revelation. Listen to him. In these last days, God has spoken to us what? In his Son. Listen to him. He's called the Word. The Father says, listen to him, hear him. In these last days, he's spoken in his Son. Yes, we're to obey him, we're to believe in him, and all those other things. But all those other things will flow from us bending the knee and listening to him. So Revelation, this is a positive approach. Now, emphasize it's not ultimately what you believe, but who you believe about the whats. We don't believe rocks and trees. Not really. So ultimately, it's who you believe regarding the whats. What's your source of truth? Who? Not what, who? Do we believe the scientific community today? Is that our highest authority? Is our tradition the highest authority regarding marriage? Is it the scientific community, as they're still looking for the genetic dependency to same-sex attraction? Is that our highest authority? See, who do you believe? Focus it back on there. And argue about who Jesus is, not one particular moral issue. Okay, so you win the issue that abortion is evil. Okay? Abortion is evil. Okay, you win that issue. Now what? Well, now I got another issue. Is gay marriage evil? Now I got another issue. There's an endless number of moral issues. Don't spend your time arguing about one moral issue. It's almost fruitless. Not that it isn't important to support those causes and to support the Crisis Pregnancy Center, because we are sharing the gospel as Christians as we come along, men and women in those situations. But don't go there, and you ladies that are involved, I know you don't do that, but don't go there and just argue about the issue of abortion. You go there to show them who Jesus Christ is. That he is the one that makes our life precious. He is the creator. So don't just argue about a moral issue. Argue about who Jesus is. Now, yeah, you will need some apologetic approach from there. You will. We do. But remember, you're always asking the skeptic, why should I believe so-and-so? Why should I believe Freud and Dewey, about American education? Why should I believe Dewey about education? And put millions of our children in a system that's driven by the philosophy of Dewey, which it is. Why should I believe him? Why should I believe so-and-so whom you put forth instead of believing Jesus? So keep the discussion focused here. We are Christians, not moralist traditionalists. You won't always be dealing with skeptics. God will prepare some people who desire to know who Jesus is. And I'd still start with Revelation. If people believe Jesus, then believing every other doctrine will come, including marriage. I mean, that's it. If they believe Jesus is who he claimed to be, every other doctrine will come. They will all come. So, is there a becoming all things to all men factor in dealing with postmoderns? Yeah, there is. And these discussions have been restricted mainly to the intellectual issues and things. But there is a becoming all things to all men. And there's an important touchy-feely dimension, and I don't mean that in a negative way by saying that. God has given us touchy-feely in the way he made us. There's an important dimension, and a lot has been said regarding how not to turn off postmoderns and attack them. And I do think when you try to talk about who Jesus is as a person, it's not as big of a turnoff as trying to say, I know the truth. You see, you've moved up one step. I don't know the truth, but you know what? I know someone who does. I mean, you don't say it that blatantly when you want to talk about Jesus, but that's what you're saying. You want to talk about this person, Jesus. He's historical, he exists. Let's talk about this person, Jesus. Now, a lot of people will hate that too, but that's not as abrasive as saying, well, you're a sinner and you don't know any truth. I mean, that's true, I'm a sinner and I don't know any truth either. But there's a way to not be abrasive, or at least attempt to, and we haven't been dealing with that. And that has also led to a lot of compromise, however, but it's important. It's an important subject beyond what we've presented here. Now, the positive approach I've just outlined, dealing with postmoderns. The negative approach is that without revelation from God, we might as well either slit our throats or get drunk every night. I mean, that's about it, because we're doomed and we're in the dark. And I say that kind of graphically, but I also say that seriously. And you see that all over in our culture. So we're going to change roles, and Ryan is going to be doulos, and I'm going to be Skep about our discussion now about good and evil, and can we know good and evil without revelation. And I had some good notes written down that I was going to throw at Skep, and I didn't bring them with me. So we'll try to do it from memory.
That's your excuse.
That's my excuse. Yeah, if I just roll and you convince me so quickly, that's my excuse. I didn't bring my hard ammunition.
I see how it works.
All right, so Skep, I'm going to defend one of your philosophers, who said this. He said, if there's no God, then everything is permissible. Do you know who said that?
No, but I don't believe that.
Well, you should. Why wouldn't you believe that?
Because I think there's a lot of people that know it's not permissible to kill your neighbor and to abuse children. I mean, we know that.
So you're against abortion then, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what about if someone was attacking you? Are you going to attack back?
I'm going to defend myself.
So you're going to kill them?
No, I'm going to use sufficient force to defend myself.
Up into?
Yeah, if I had to kill them to protect my family, I would.
So then killing's not as black and white as you're making it out to be, is it?
I don't think I made it out to be black and white.
Well, there are some situations in which killing's okay.
Yes, I would kill someone to defend my child from being murdered.
So where do you get the idea that killing is bad?
I know that. It's built into me.
But there are other people that it's built into them that killing's okay.
Well, they're more depraved.
I don't know what that means. What does that mean?
They're only thinking about themselves.
Why is that wrong? What's wrong with that?
I know that it's wrong.
Why?
Most people know that it's wrong.
But if do you accept evolution? That's how we got here?
You know, I'm not sure.
Okay. So those people that believe that murder is okay, aren't they asserting themselves above another person?
Oh yeah, they are.
Yeah. And if they're a higher form in our species, isn't that okay for them to assert themselves in that way?
Well, there's a lot of moral implications to the theory of evolution, and I'm not all gung-ho on the theory.
Okay, let's say,
because, so if an evolutionist, he's got some problems, because survival of the fittest would mean survival, the most selfish would survive.
So
but I don't see that in
where
our
do you
world.
get the idea that selfishness is bad, though? Where do you get that?
Most people would agree with me.
So are you saying that numbers is what makes things right?
I think it gives us some insight. Yeah. Most people would agree that murder is wrong, except in the case of genuinely self-defense.
And abortion, because most people agree that abortion's okay.
Well, I'm
you-
not sure on the abortion question.
Well, a few seconds ago, you just said it was murder.
That's true. Like I said, I
Pretty
could argue
floppity on this.
either way. Well, hey, I don't have all the answers. I'm not ashamed to not have all the answers.
Okay. So, we just took one scenario in which it seems like you're a little unsure, right? You're a little unsure whether or not abortion's murder.
Yeah.
So, so would it be the same with other things like stealing? Is stealing always bad?
Is stealing always bad? Well, I don't know. I might steal to keep my child alive.
So then,
And I might lie to, if the Nazis are pounding on my door, I might lie.
okay.
Yeah.
So what is one thing? What is one portion of your ethic which you would say is consistent? Which you would say this right here, this is bad. Do not cross this line.
Well, yeah, I don't think we should murder people,
Okay.
except in self-defense.
So
I think there's positive things too.
The murder one seems to kind of
So-
be a big issue. So, how about this? Should we, or no? Let me ask it this way: is killing somebody because they're gay, is that murder?
Killing somebody for any reason other than an expression of justice that the government has that authority is evil.
Okay, so there are some entire countries right now that if you were to be born in that country, a majority of the population would say you should be murdered because you're gay.
Well, yeah, they're wrong.
But it's the majority of the people.
In that culture.
Yeah. So, but now your culture has the right to say that that culture is wrong. And by the way, you know that culture is thousands of years older than yours. So why do you think you're right?
Because inside I know that it's wrong.
But
I know
inside
that
they know it's
wrong.
right.
Well, they're wrong.
They would say, you're wrong. So it looks like you're at an impasse. Nobody wins. Why does your say trump theirs?
I think if you want to do the numbers game, my position will win.
Okay.
If you want to do the numbers game historically and culturally, I think my position will win.
So are you okay playing the numbers game?
Well, it's one of the sources of knowledge that I have.
Okay. So how about slavery?
Evil.
Okay. So you know that within our period of living, within like the last...
But I can tell you why I know slavery is evil.
Oh, okay.
Is humanity is making progress.
Okay.
Humanity is making progress, and now in the 20th and 21st centuries, as cultures, we have the tools available to evaluate our societal, what we're doing, to evaluate the outcome of our societal practices. And our nation is a great example of having gone through that. After the Enlightenment, we've got the tools to evaluate the fruit of our societal practices. And that's exactly what England and America did. And we came to the conclusion that slavery was evil. Even though, granted, historically, most cultures had slavery, but by using the tools that we now have, we come to the conclusion that slavery is evil. So I'm not saying it's all static. We have the tools to figure this out.
I would disagree. There is no better way of getting diamonds than with slaves. There's an entire industry built on the backs of slaves. And there's no other way to do it as good.
It's evil.
Why?
It's selfish.
For thousands upon thousands of years, slavery has been a universal accepted practice. And now all of a sudden, within the last 100 years, it's evil.
Well, we're making progress.
And not only that is,
I would
make the argument. I would make the argument that, in a way, we are still there. We are all slaves today. Still, you pay taxes. You work. You have an owner in a sense. Right?
Yes and no. So we're not property. We're not property. Not yet. We have to pay the national debt. Excuse me, I jumped out of the role play for a moment.
But what I'm not understanding is a justification why it's wrong. What do you go to? How do you justify? By what standard? What do you say? Okay,
that's a good question.
Now
that's a different question.
How do you justify that?
That's the holy grail of epistemology. Justification. How do you justify your position? Okay, ask me the question again.
What do you go to? What's your standard? How do you justify that slavery is wrong? Or murder, or any of these other things?
I would say that as cultures mature, they figure these things out by the fruits that these things bear.
So are you saying that the sum of what you think is right and wrong today is potentially wrong tomorrow?
Some of it could be, yeah. I think people are very arrogant who think they've got this right and wrong stuff all figured out.
Okay. And so then previous generations, their sum of what was right and wrong is different from what your right and wrong is?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. So then we're right back
progress.
to, if there is no God, everything's permissible.
Well, I don't believe that.
But you just said you do, because tomorrow what's right and wrong can be different, and yesterday what's right and wrong is different. So there is no standard right and wrong.
No, it's like whether the planets rotate around the sun, or whether the Earth rotates around the sun, or the sun rotates around the Earth. I mean, we had it wrong, and with the tools that we have, we worked through the situation, and now we have it right.
Okay, so you're using tools to evaluate something. What's that something that you're evaluating?
Well, in that case, it's whether the sun rotates around the Earth or the
No,
Earth
we're not
rotates
talking,
around
no, we're
the sun.
talking about good and evil here. We're not talking about the sun or the moon or stars or whatever else. We're talking about murder.
Yeah, but I'm serious about the process. I think the process I illustrated with the scientific illustration is entirely valid with human behavior.
Sure, so what I'm asking is, you're saying you use tools to evaluate ethics, but what
Yes.
standard of tools are you using? I mean, you're using circles and systems to measure the sun and stars and moons. What's that system that you're using with these tools to evaluate slavery or murder?
I would say it's like our Constitution says, that humans have a right to liberty, and that which gives them the most freedom, where their freedoms do not infringe on the freedoms of others, is a moral good.
Based on what? I mean, like,
Based
why?
on-
Where does that come from?
It's what most people would consider good.
So then we're back to population or populace.
Yeah.
Numbers make right.
Well, I mean, the trees don't talk to me.
Okay, so in the entirety of history, numbers have said that slavery is right.
Yeah, but if you include the entirety of history,
Yeah.
cultures have figured out that it's wrong. You see,
Ours
you're
did.
discounting
Ours have figured
my
out that
argument.
it's wrong.
You're discounting my argument.
Well, because it's wrong.
Why should I believe you?
There's an entire
Why should I believe you?
there's an entire society digging for diamonds on the backs of slaves. All those numbers say that it's right. But here's the other problem. Here's the other problem.
But the problem is that society has not made the progress that Western culture has made.
Right.
Western culture now, since the Enlightenment forward, universally knows that slavery is wrong, and has done many things that it can to eliminate it.
Well, let's just give it 100 years, and they'll come around again. We just need to have them advance enough to now see that this last 150 years has all been a bad experiment. See, that's
I don't
the
think
thing.
that's going to happen.
That's the thing. If right and wrong is in constant flux, then what you're so adamant about today is going to be different tomorrow.
Well, like I said, I mean, I'm working with the tools that I have
To measure what?
to figure out what's right and wrong.
Okay, so, and one of those tools you said is based on numbers, right?
Based on numbers and,
Okay.
and evaluating the results of our decisions,
So what-
individually or as a culture.
What about when a society says that they've been able to isolate superior human beings, and they want to make sure that superior human beings can breed and make more superior human beings?
It's called eugenics.
Yeah, and at the same time, they want to actually kill off weaker beings. Is that okay? Like a whole society determined to do that. Is that right or wrong?
It's scary.
I didn't ask if it was, I don't care if it's scary.
I do.
I care if is it right or wrong.
Is it right or wrong?
The society
Yeah.
determines that that's what they're going to do.
Well, that's a tough question. Yeah, I agree. That's tough.
Okay, so
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't have.
If there's no God, everything's
I don't.
permissible.
You're trying to put me into this mold where I'm going to be dogmatic about right and wrong, and that just seems arrogant to me. I'm not, some of the questions I'm agnostic about, I don't know yet.
Sure.
So
then how can, if you're not sure about all this, why can you complain when somebody else kills someone?
why can I complain? Because I know that that's wrong.
By how?
It's just in me.
But it's just in him that killing someone is right.
I gotta jump out of the role play for a moment. I'm arguing now not as a postmodern. I'm arguing as an Enlightenment thinker.
Yeah.
I'm arguing on the basis of general revelation is what I'm doing. This far. And I need you to refute Descartes and Kant about general revelation, and then I'll become a postmodern.
Okay. So what you're saying is that you've been born with some set of rules or right and wrong that help you navigate life. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I have a strong sense
Okay.
of that.
So
and a lot of people do.
Okay, but
not everybody, but a lot of people do.
But a lot of people are born with different navigations of right and wrong than you. So
yeah, but I think most of the neighbors on your street aren't going to kick your door in and steal your flat screen TV.
But that happens all the time.
Has it ever happened to you?
Hasn't happened to me, but just because it hasn't happened to me doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Right.
But we do
I
see
know
that.
It does happen.
Yeah.
But the majority of the people on your street aren't going to kick your door down and aren't going to kick your door down and steal.
But again, that's a fallacy. You understand that, right?
I see it as a fact. I mean, we could go gather the
by
scientific
numbers.
data,
If you're
I think that what I'm saying is true.
If you're saying that it's right based on numbers, that's a logical fallacy, because numbers don't determine what's right or wrong, just like when most of the world believed that the world was flat.
That's true. Yeah, I agree.
So just because
we've
a
gotten it wrong
majority,
at times, and in my personal life I get it wrong a lot.
right. So again, we're back to what do you use, or how do you find out what's right or wrong?
That's it. I've done, I think the methods of modern science, looking at the results, with some values of people want to be happy,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to be free, and I think those are virtues. Those are good things, to be free and to be happy.
So is happiness the highest virtue?
Not if it was at the expense of another's unhappiness.
So how do you gauge happiness?
Ask the person.
So if one person enjoys pain and the other person enjoys inflicting pain, is it okay for that relationship to come together?
No.
They're both finding joy at what's happening.
Yeah.
And why do you tell them that it's not right when they say that we're happy doing this?
Because we shouldn't mistreat people.
But it's not mistreating.
Sure it is, causing them pain.
But they enjoy it. So it's not pain.
Which one enjoys it?
I don't know,
Are you talking about the masochist or the person receiving the mistreatment?
Receiving the mistreatment enjoys pain.
So they both enjoy it.
Yeah.
That would be a stronger argument, by the way.
Right.
Where they both enjoy it.
Yeah, they both enjoy it.
Where the person inflicting and the person receiving it both
Correct.
enjoy it.
Correct.
That's the stronger argument.
Right. That's the argument.
Okay. So how would Skep answer that? Okay, I'll give it to you. Something's wrong there.
What does that mean?
Well, you tell me.
Well, I mean,
how do you know anything's wrong?
The only way anybody can know if anything's wrong is if the God of the universe tells people his ethical standard, and he has in Scripture.
You know what that sounds like to me?
What does that sound like to you?
It's like a cop-out. And the reason it sounds like a cop-out is, I realize, we may be in a bleak situation, but it's kind of childish just to invent God because the situation's so bleak.
Well, I have another quote for you.
On bleak situations. So there's a philosopher named Albert Camus. Are you familiar with him?
No.
He said, there is but one truly serious philosophical problem. And that's suicide. So, however bleak your situation is, the only real problem is, why stay in it if it's so bleak?
Yeah, I don't deny the weight of those kinds of questions.
So then why are you here?
Sometimes I don't know.
Okay. So
I mean, I wish you could, the God thing. No, I'm really serious. Just because, the situation seems bleak, that's not a reason that God is. I mean, it's kind of childish.
It's not a reason God's not.
Children invent stuff and have this imaginary life when they can't cope. I mean, we see that psychologically all the time. When a child can't cope with a situation, he just invents things. And your approach sounds like that to me.
Well, here's
you're
the thing,
inventing
frankly,
God because I don't have this hard and fast definition of good and evil, so you need to invent God to solve the problem.
Frankly, I don't really care that you think it sounds like I'm making up God to justify something. I mean, I don't really care. And the reason is, it's like being mad at the tree in your yard. It's there. It's just reality. So God is just reality. And if you say that I'm using him to cope with life, he's there. God exists. He's spoken to mankind. So I don't really have to deal with that argument. Now the problem is, I'm pointing out the fact that you can't justify any right and wrong. I can, with my crutch, me and my big old crutch over here, I can justify things. You can't. And that's all I'm pointing out.
You've got to justify your crutch.
Oh, I can. That's not a problem. But that's a whole different issue than right and wrong. But you.
Well, go ahead.
Here's the right and wrong argument. Right and wrong on the whole scale of things is right down here. God's all the way up here. You can't even justify this. Why would we have a discussion about that? You can't even justify right and wrong. You can't justify your own existence. You can't justify whether or not to continue to live. So why do you expect me, or why do you want to talk about that?
Why is my humility a liability? I mean, you sound very arrogant to me.
Why is that wrong? What's wrong with arrogance? What's wrong with arrogance?
There's been a lot of people that have thought they're right, and history has shown that they're just wrong.
And you think I'm wrong, which means you think you're right, and that's arrogant of you.
Well, I may be arrogant. That's true.
Okay, so
I don't know. I mean, I'm not perfect. I mean, what do you think?
Well, you came to me with a complaint, and your complaint against me is actually pointing right back at you. That knife cuts both ways.
Well, most people are a lot alike.
Okay. So, here's the thing.
I have a question. Can
Sure.
I?
Yes.
You know, give me some reasons
Yeah.
about your crutch. I mean, I'm not, you know, I can see that, you know, it'd be wonderful if that, you know, there was some real definition of right and wrong. I mean, but it's like, you're just expecting me to believe it because you say it.
So, are you familiar with the Bible?
Some, yeah.
Okay. So the Bible is a collection of God's word to humanity.
Well, I mean, it's a collection of the human authors who wrote it.
Are we getting into a different debate?
We might have to. But I'm not agreeing with your statement, you see. You told me the Bible is God's word, and you're expecting me to agree, and I mean, I'm not going to roll on that one very easy as an unbeliever.
Here's what I'll say. I'm not going to defend my positive belief in God. I am going to expect you to defend or justify what you don't know or why you don't know it, because you know nothing at this point. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to jump into my belief bandwagon and drive it into a tree.
No, I'm asking.
So
I'd like to believe what you believe, but I mean, you can't expect me just to set my rationality aside.
What rationality?
I mean, our whole discussion we're having.
Our whole discussion's been completely irrational. You haven't justified any of your beliefs using anything rational.
Well, you haven't either. I just
All I've
asked you
done
to
is
give
ask
me some
questions.
reasons, and you don't want to give me any reasons.
But here's the thing. I haven't posited anything.
You posited that God exists.
Only to.
I mean,
Only
you
to
assumed the conclusion of the argument before it started.
100%, because that's the reality of the situation.
Well, that's your belief.
No.
Yes, it is. That's
My-
your conviction.
My belief or conviction, and yours as well, reality doesn't hinge on the belief of us.
Okay, we're gonna allow some Q&A time.
Okay.
Okay. So
You changed the topic.
I told you in the email I was going to argue at first. I told you I was going to argue from as an enlightenment first, and then I was going to argue as a postmodern.
That wasn't a postmodern argument.
No, we haven't gotten there. Okay, you have questions? We got about 10 minutes to interact with this intellectual arguing back and forth.
I think you've totally confused us. Just kidding.
Well, we may have, but don't. We thought about you guys throwing up hands if we lost you, but questions or comments?
I'll ask one. Fine. It does seem that you stopped right as Doulos was about to call you on your irrationality from enlightenment thinking, and it's kind of a difficult place to stop because he's kind of right. Your response. So besides the God argument, which you threw back at him, the rest of the discussion was his questions to you. How, where would you have gone with the fact that you don't have a foundation anywhere until your rationality is a bit fragmented?
Where would I, as the unbeliever?
As a skeptic, yeah.
Well, I would say, yeah. I mean, maybe it is bleak. You know, I'm not saying I have all the answers. See, all I have is a process of history. That's Dewey, by the way. I'm throwing Dewey at you regarding the historical progress argument, and that's what's running our public schools. So that's what, yeah, I would just you know, I
isn't
wouldn't
that-
profess to have that. I would
How
say
do
I'm
you
working
have
with
a-
the tools that I have.
But a rationality has to have a premise, and you're not actually founding, you're not stopping on a premise anywhere. Your premise is moving.
No, I'm not. That's true.
Okay.
I have assumptions and I'm operating from them.
Okay, it seemed like that Doulos was having a hard time of actually pinpointing your assumptions.
That's correct, because I'm using different ones at different times.
Okay. I think that's what I was wondering.
So, why don't you respond to why it's not been rational?
Because it's changing.
Okay. Yeah.
So you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
So if your ethical standard's changing, then it is irrational. Because if it was rational or logical, then it would be unchanging.
Yeah. And now I become a postmodern and say it doesn't matter. Rationality doesn't matter.
Correct. So then, yeah.
Yeah.
So then my response to that is, then why do you care so much about what people do?
Well, but by experience, I do care. You see, you can't deny my experience.
Well, that's not rational.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of unbelievers
So as long
who
as
have a
you're
measure
okay-
of care for others.
As long
You know,
as you're
Mother
okay-
Teresa.
Yeah. Obama. As long as you're okay acknowledging that your position's not rational.
Sure, as a believer, I will acknowledge that. As an unbeliever, you know, I don't know whether I would acknowledge that or not. But
Even as an unbeliever, I would
Yeah.
think they would have to admit that if it's on the basis of feelings, that it's irrational. Because you just point out that
Yeah.
that's subjective.
But rationality is always based on a premise and a minor premise, and those are always assumed. I'll grant you that. As an unbeliever, I can grant that. I mean, you're doing the same. Your rationality is based on assumed premises, just
But
as
he'll-
mine is.
But he'll
Correct.
pinpoint his and stay on it. He won't move it.
Yeah.
His won't move.
Right. That's right. But his rationality is based on assumed premises. Everybody's is.
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't your argument eventually lead to agnosticism?
I withheld playing the agnosticism card, but I played it a little bit by saying, hey, I'm not saying I've got all the answers.
Right, but eventually
Yeah.
do you believe that's where your logical conclusion ends?
Well, yeah, my logical conclusion ends.
If Doulos eventually has this discussion all the way to its end, you eventually wind up as an agnostic, where you can't know anything and no one can know anything.
Mm-hmm. Correct. And that's where I'm
Yeah.
taking it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I
Would
think
you,
so.
would you think that that's where you're going to wind up?
Well, I gave him an out because I said it sounds so good to know, if there was some way to really know good and evil. Give me some reasons. I'm not here so in love with my sin that I want to just die on this hill. If the good and evil is different than what lines up in my life, then I need to repent. So our approach to apologetics isn't identical. It overlaps some, and some of that has been going on in this conversation as well.
The lack of time also makes it difficult.
Yeah.
One more
So,
question.
but-
Doulos, when you eventually pin him down to agnosticism,
Mm-hmm.
do you then
Yeah, that's
do
what-
you then open up the scriptures?
Yeah, that's where
Okay.
I posit the Bible. I start saying things, right? But the thing is, I thought he was going to go into a postmodern argument, and he was already jumping to the evangelical discussion.
Well, I jumped over the postmodern argument.
Yeah,
Our time was running
you jumped
out.
right over it. And I'm like, whoa, hey, yeah. So yeah, no, that's where you have to undo. You undo a lot of their position, and then you get them to this point. You're like, okay, you're really at the point where you can't know anything, but here's how you can know things. and here's a sure foundation, and then you walk them through Scripture.
Yeah, we could have gotten to the point, Paul, I see where you're going, to where, back to that certainty question. Yeah, you're right. I don't know anything with absolute certainty. Yeah.
That quote that you wrote up there from Camus, could you explain that?
Camus?
Yeah, however you say his name.
There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that's suicide. So we can't even justify our existence. And he said the situation may be bleak, but at least I'm not creating a crutch. I'm not creating God. I'm not creating some fairy tale belief system, right? If the fairy tale belief system, which is untrue, keeps you alive, that's what he's saying. He's saying, I'm only here, I'm only believing what I am because of a lie. But he's superior because he continues to live without that lie. Well, then really the only question is whether or not to kill yourself. Why put up with all this garbage? You don't know what's right and wrong. You don't know what's real. You don't know if tomorrow's going to be worse than today. And if tomorrow's worse than today, the next day might be worse than that day. So you don't know. So why not just end it now? Because it doesn't matter.
Yep.
It's meaningless.
Yep, I agree. And you weren't here on the 12th, but that's exactly, Gordon Clark goes from Thales to Dewey in the Survey of Western Philosophy, and he ends with this, showing the bankruptcy. I don't know how many of you were here, but that's exactly where he ends. And he makes this amazing statement. Or could it be that a choice must be made between skeptical futility, nihilism, get back on the merry-go-round, and a word from God? And that's his point. That's the choice that has to be made. Yeah. If you truly follow this out rationally, it's one or the other. Yeah. It's skeptical futility, and that's where the Enlightenment ended. And that's when we switched to postmodernism. We don't know anything with certainty. We even give up on the quest.
Yeah.
And look what he said. The answer to this to answer this question for himself, the student, since he cannot ride very fast into the future and discover what a new age will do, might begin turning back to the first page and pondering the whole thing over again. This will at least stave off suicide for a few days more. That's the same that Camus is saying. So our time is up, and so we'll continue. We're going to try to do the problem of evil, and we may do one more on this, and the reliability of the New Testament.